I'm simply going to say that perhaps one thing that we have been learning more clearly than ever before during the last year or two is that racism is an institutional phenomenon. We speak of institutional racism, and that this is something different from, although related to, the psychological racism that occupies our mind and being. By institutional racism, we mean, of course, the fact that virtually every institution in American life is affected by certain racist assumptions. And in this session, we're going to talk about the implications of institutional racism so far as the law enforcement agencies are concerned. In a sense, I suppose this is one of the most critical institutions in human relations, because it's that sort of at the edge of the delicate balance between justice and order and dignity and freedom on the one hand and security on the other. Now, I am not going to say any more about this, but I'm glad to introduce to you the first speaker on the panel, who is a member, as you know, if you have read the papers, of the Minneapolis Human Rights Commission. He is a member of that for quite a long while, when his status was somewhat ambiguous for reasons that most of you know. He is also a community resource specialist for the the Twin City Opportunities Industrialization, what's the last? Center. This is an age of alphabets. TCIOIC, but I thought it was going to be one up on you and give the name so that you know what I was talking about. And I turned out to expose my ignorance. He was also board chairman of the Inner City Youth League of St. Paul, and has his certificate in community organization from the University of Syracuse. And this may interest some of you, where he studied under Saul Alinsky. I'm very happy to present to you Mr. Ron Edwards.
Thank you. I heard him say I thought he was going to say the next president of the United States. I think most of us are finished with our popsicles, and now we can continue on. I'm happy to be able to get my blows in before Frank Kent gets here. Apparently Frank's going to be a little late. I don't know what it is. We're going to discuss law enforcement in the ghettos, and Frank being a Republican, you see, I'm not telling anything out of school here, you see. And with Frank being a Republican, and with the statement made by Dickie Nixon up in Fargo a couple weeks ago, this thing talking about that we're not really concerned with the problems in the ghetto and the urban cities of our country, but we must maintain that 7-to-1 ratio in missiles over the communists. Frank probably has to get his directions on what to say here this morning, you see. I think we want to take a position that we must maintain law and order, and I think we all agree to that, don't we? We must maintain law and order. Is that right? Right. In fact, all of you here that believe that, raise your hands, would you please? That believe we must maintain law and order. Beautiful, beautiful. Now let me see, what about justice? Without order, there's no degree of law and justice, and without justice, there's no degree of law and order. Wouldn't that be right? Or would I be wrong in making that assumption? Oh, well, I was just wondering where we were coming from, because see, in this country today, we have gotten tied up in this thing of talking about just law and order, and we've forgotten justice, you see. And I think that's become the theme now. We talk about themes for songs, well, that's become the theme for the politicians now. Yes, crime in the street, lawlessness, and maintaining law and order. You see, we have no degree of justice. And it's interesting today when you talk to your police officials, both federal and municipal and state, that when you raise this question of law and order, you see, and you leave out that part of justice, and they do just like most of you did here just now. They kind of nod their head and say, right, this is what we have to have. And then when you ask them, well, what about justice, and they tell you that is the prerogative of the court, that the court does this. The court deals with justice. The police officer doesn't deal with justice, you see. And I think that's an amazing statement, you see. If an officer is not concerned with justice, I don't know how he could render any degree of law and order. Now, I know that sounds confusing, you see, but that shows you what a confusing state our country is in today. You see, we are a confused country, you know. Anytime we have, 6 people running around with ambitions to be presidential candidates, you know, well, they are presidential candidates, but want to be presidents, and talking about types of things they're talking about, we must be in a confused state, you see. On one hand, we have someone talking about law and order, you know, lawlessness in the street. Of course, now I maintain that we've had lawlessness in this country, you see, since 1619 at Jamestown. You see, we had law and order. We had lawlessness in this country in 1776 in Boston. You see, we had law and order. We had lawlessness in this country. I keep saying that law and order thing, man. It got me brainwashed on that thing too. But we're thinking away, you see. And God knows we had lawlessness in Chicago in the 1930s, you see. And it's an amazing thing about lawlessness. See, we talk about lawlessness now today in the country, and automatically this means we're talking about black people, you see. We no longer talk about the Costa Nostra and the Mafia. You see, when we talk about lawlessness, we talk about black people. We've forgotten organized crime in this country, you see. And black people really have never been a part of organized crime. Now, we have contributed to it by playing policy, you understand, being involved in narcotics and things like that, you understand. We've never handled the top money, you see. But it was amazing that when you talk about lawlessness in this country today, you see, you talk about, automatically everyone says black people, you understand. Blacks in the streets rioting, you understand. Committing atrocious acts against society, you see. Now, it's amazing that in 1930s, you see, when you had Al Capone running about the country dropping people off in Lake Michigan, you see, we didn't talk about sending all the Italians back to Italy, did we? Am I wrong? All right. And when Babyface Nelson was ripping and running through the Midwest, you know, robbing banks and shooting people, you understand, and kidnapping people, we didn't talk about sending all the Scandinavians back to Sweden. No, certainly not. You know, so it's amazing that now with all this lawlessness, supposed lawlessness in the street, you understand, that someone like Eddie Willis down there in Louisiana, who is chairman of the Judicial Committee for the House of Representatives, I believe, talks about detention centers, you see. And I'm not clear in my mind what he means by detention centers, you see. Detention centers for who? Now, he said that the reason that this bill was being talked about in committee, you see, is because there was reason to believe that there was going to be some type of guerrilla activity on the part of black people in this country. You see, well, I maintain the Ku Klux Klan has been maintaining a degree of guerrilla activity in this country for the last 30 years. You see, and we didn't talk about detention centers. Why, we can't even get an anti-lynch bill in this country, you understand. And I'm amazed at that, you know. Of course, we finally got around to open housing, you see. Isn't that a beautiful thing? You got to have a law so I can live next door to you. That's really something. That's amazing, you see. Of course, now when we talked about you people passing the law so some of your friends in the South wouldn't hang me, you understand, man, so that's ridiculous. We know those types of things don't happen, you know. But I guess this all ties in with law and order, you see. And we really hung up on this thing of law and order in this country. And I guess now that we're supposed to get to I should be at the point now where I should be talking about the law enforcement agencies of our country. Now, see, what we should have had here at this particular thing was that we should have been able to have a black police officer, you understand, from the Minneapolis Police Department to come out here and talk to you. But then seeing that we have so few of them in the department, you understand, I guess that would be pretty hard to do. And of course, it would probably be nice to have a black fireman out here, too, to talk to, but then we don't have any black firemen at all in the fire department, so that's going to be pretty difficult. Of course, now, let me see, I'm trying to figure out where I'm at, you see. I'm trying to figure out if I'm in Birmingham, Alabama, or Minneapolis, Minnesota. Where am I? Which is this? Right, and this is the land of Hubert Humphrey, the great liberal, isn't that right? Yeah, right. I was just trying to get my thing together. Well, of course, now, first of all, I want you to understand, I just didn't get here. I've been here 22 years, you see. I just didn't come in on the cotton barge. I've been here a long time, right. And that brings me another point to mind. When we talk about length of time that individual has been in a certain particular place, I guess this gives him credentials, you understand, to address himself to particular problems. And I've always been amazed at the incident in Chicago in 1966, you see, when we had some first and second generation East Europeans, you understand, we're talking about, we don't want them to live next door to us, you see. And I thought that was amazing because, see, some of those same very people that were hollering that, you understand, maybe one of my black uncles was the one that opened the concentration gate for him to come on out. Did you pick that up? Right. No, but I'm just wondering about, you know, who is what, because, see, now, we've been here all, some people say 400 years, some say 355 years, you know. Whatever what it is, we've been here, you see. We've been here. We just didn't come over. We didn't come over during the potato famine. You understand? Yeah, right. You know. No, I'm I'm just trying to get myself, but we didn't come over during the religious persecution and, by the Church of England, you understand. We didn't come over then, you see. So I'm just trying to figure, who's what, you understand, and what rights do we have. Of course, then I know that we have the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, and that guarantees us all the rights as the same as anyone else. Is that true? Huh? Supposed to, right. But does it? No. And I wonder why that is. Could this be a part of institutional racism? You think that's what it could be? Of course, now I know that not all of us concur that there is racism in this country, white racism in this country. Is that an accurate statement? Was that an accurate statement by the Kerner Commission, that there is racism, white racism in this country? I see some gentlemen over there looking very, very hardcore. They look almost like right-wingers. But no, I'm wondering. I'm trying to get my thing clear, because I am confused. You see, and I've only had 6 generations of people in this country, and I'm confused what's happening. You see, because we were talking about that there was racism, white racism in this country. Way back in the 1960s and the 50s. You see, and well, of course, the way the thing went then, the man called you crazy, said you were a nut, and you should be sent off to the nut house. You see. Then we came along during the era of McCarthy. You see. That was the one from Wisconsin, not the one from here. And we talked about communism, you see. We had the big purges and things. We had McCarthy hearings, you understand. We purged X number of people out of the State Department and things like that, you understand. Said that people had to have loyalty tests and that type of thing, Right? Is that right? Let me ask you something here. Do you feel that is the right type of procedure under this democracy to make a man take a loyalty oath? You don't think so? Right. And then you do believe that a man should be able or should be allowed to practice any type of political philosophy that he so desires. Isn't this right? Is that right? Well, then why have we outlawed the Communist Party in this country? Or am I wrong? The Communist Party hasn't been outlawed? I'm trying to see if we have any students of political science in here. Do we have any? Right.
I don't think it's outlawed. The person has to
register.
Register as a member. But it's
Right. Let me see. The Ku Klux Klan registers too, don't they? I'm just like I said, I'm confused at what goes on in this country, and I'm amazed. But now I guess we're talking about law enforcement. As I said, I would have been hopeful that we're talking about law enforcement in the ghetto, and we would had an opportunity to have a professional law enforcement officer here, so that he could have, well, not defended. You understand? We never want the police department to defend what they're doing. You see. But to speak to the question of what the police department does in the ghetto, how it handles a crime in the ghetto opposed to a crime that would happen out here on 57th and Xerxes somewhere, you see, because we know that both of them are handled the same. Isn't that right? No. I think that you're all familiar, and some people had asked me to address myself to this, of the situation that's happened in regards to the 4 Golden Valley policemen. These were the fellows that were coming down the street. They'd been to a party in St. Louis Park, which is, St. Louis Park is right next to Golden Valley, isn't that right? That's going west from here, right? And they had come into Minneapolis, you see, and then they was going back out to Golden Valley by way of Plymouth Avenue. So usually go out Ocean Highway. And what had happened, a car broke down. I know that all of you know this, but I'm just, helping you along that didn't read it. And what happened was that they were coming down Plymouth Avenue in the car. I think the car broke down or something, stopped around with gas, something like that, And let me see now, they were going down Plymouth and they coasted onto a side street, and they were going to a filling station, you see, for assistance, aid, that type of thing. And what happened is that some gangsters, black gangsters, you see. No, really, I guess that's what the chief police said they were. You understand, waylaid them, you understand, ambush, same type of thing that goes on in Vietnam every day. And robbed them of $126, you see. Now, what happened, I guess, is 3 black women, you understand, we just can't accept these black women. We cannot accept the credibility of these black women, you understand. First of all, we're talking about 3 black women opposed to 4 guardians of the law, pardon me. But what happened, these women said and maintained that the officers had made derogatory remarks to them and, in fact, put their hands on them, you see. And they went down to the police station to make a complaint, you see. This is the usual procedure, under our system, you see. And they got down there, I don't know what happened if the police department, and I know they're having a budget problem, you see. I don't know if they didn't have any pencils or pads or what it was, but they weren't able to take a complaint from the women, you see. So he told them to come on back, and I think that was on a Thursday night. He told them to come on back down Monday, you see, and go to the city attorney, who is, I guess, you would call the chief law enforcement officer for the city of Minneapolis, you see. I guess that's the proper term. And to come back down and to give him a statement, you see, on what took place. Well, now, when they got down there, let me see now, the city attorney was in his office, and they had their attorney with them. I mean, some of us do know the game. You've got to carry somebody with you. You don't know what they might pull on you while you're down there. And they went in, and they recited the story again to him, repeated the story again. And after they'd gotten through telling him what had happened, you understand, he looked over to the inspector who was there that Friday night, you understand. And he said, is that what they told you, you see? And automatically, I guess that he was questioning the credibility of these three women. And the inspector said, yeah, said something like that. So then the city attorney said, well, let me go down the hall here and talk to a couple of the judges and see that if it's legal for me to draw up a complaint, you see. Now, I'm confused about the system because this man, I'm quite sure this man had at least 4 years of law, didn't he? And I know he has a library down there that has X number of law books. You understand? If he can read, all you do is take the law book out and just browse through it. But he said he's going down and talk to the judge. And I guess he went down and talked to a couple of the judges, and the judge, spoke rather harshly to him. And I guess this kind of ruffled the assistant city attorney's feathers a little bit. And then what he finally said, he said, well, he looked at his watch, and we are on this thing of 9 to 5, you know, see, even dealing with law and order. And he looked at his watch, and he said, well, he says, 4:30 now, you know, and I'm tired. I put in a hard day, you see. And why don't you come on back down tomorrow, and I will, you know, if I can find someone, make up this complaint. Well, the women didn't go back down, you understand. Now, I know that some of us can be sympathetic for the reason of them not going back down. Others of us probably can't. But see, that's just part of the runaround that you get, you see, from the establishment. That's part of the things you can look forward to. You see, I've always maintained that, and we know how efficient the law enforcement agencies are in dealing with a black man who's committed a crime against white society, you see. We know how efficient they are, you know. We know the man wastes no time, you understand, in apprehending you and bringing you to trial and taking you on off the penitentiary, you see. Of course, the other amazing thing about that, and this is again in Minnesota, you see, and this is probably one of the most liberal places in the country, the United States of America today. Isn't that right? I mean, we'd all say that, I know. You understand? Particularly those of us that are wearing, well, I don't see any Humphrey buttons. No. But, no, really, I know I sound facetious, but I don't mean to be. But, you know, that's part of the game. No, I better not say what I was going to say. I probably would put me in bad with certain people. But yeah, well, and I don't know if I should say that. I don't know how well you people would take that. And what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to start waiting for Frank Kent to come in because I know he has some interesting things to tell you on what his department is doing over there at that's the State Department on Human and Civil Rights, I believe it is. And it addresses itself to all the racial problems in this state. Of course, I know that I don't know why we have such a department as that in the state of Minnesota because really we don't have any problems here. I think we all realize that. Isn't that right? All right. Okay. There's one thing I like about this group. We're in total agreement on that. That we have no problems and that the city of Minneapolis has no problems. You understand? And that law enforcement here is a beautiful thing. In fact, it really is. No, it is. It really is. It's part of the law and order thing, isn't it? And it's a beautiful thing. And I think it's something that we all need. You know, like I said, I'm still sitting and waiting for Frank Kent. I don't want to bore you with the conversation. And I know that you're all familiar with the thing of law and order. I have something I really want to say, and I'm trying to test the group out to see if I should say it. You understand? Huh? No. You're begging too good. That's the reverse thing. I should be doing that. You see. But no, I think that really, and I know that this question will come up from many of you. What can we do? You see, this is the thing that we all say nowadays. At first, it used to be what's the problem. Nowadays, what can we do? And it's amazing. I really couldn't tell you what you can do. You see, because we have all these laws on the books, addressing ourselves to civil and human rights in this country. But apparently the police departments in this country do not adhere to that. And now, what is one other point I would like to bring up, and this is something it's rather close to my heart. It's rather amazing, and I see it happening all the time. And it's there again. It's in line with this thing of lawlessness in this country, and it's in regard to the arms race that's going on in America. You see, a lot of us are fooled and think that only an arms race is going on between this country and communism. You see, well, hell, we got arms race going on here. While you go out in the suburbs and you got that nice little grandmother, 65 years old, man, she's out to the rifle range, the pistol range, you understand, 38 in her hand, you understand, shooting at targets, you see. Now, the reason that is given for this, and I think there was a film on this on NBC, I guess, a couple months ago, or PBL, and they were discussing that, particularly around the Detroit area, that people were concerned with an outbreak again of racial strife in the Detroit area, and that it was necessary for the people living in the suburbs to arm. Now, what I'm trying to do, and I haven't found any documentation on it yet, I'm trying to find out just how many groups, you understand, carloads of blacks, you understand, in the past 3 summers during the racial strife that's taking place in this country, you see, have in fact, went out of the inner core area, into the suburbs, you understand, burning, looting, killing, this type of thing. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to come up with anything on that. Now, if anyone here has any, and I know this, when questions come from the audience, that someone here will have knowledge of that, which would be beautiful, and at that time we can debate that point. But it's amazing that the people are arming out there in Detroit, and they say that they're preparing for the black onrush. And like I say again, I'm not clear myself because I don't know, with the exception of Detroit. We are familiar with Detroit, some of us are. And because of the geographical location and the way that the ghetto is situated in Detroit, it does stretch as far as the northern city limits of the city of Detroit. So consequently, in Detroit, there might have been a spilling over of some type of black-white confrontation, you understand? Maybe a couple carloads of blacks did go into the suburban areas. But now we come to a city like Minneapolis, you see, where people are arming, where we have little paramilitary groups out in places like Golden Valley and Richfield and Bloomington, you understand? And it's what we call gearing up, you see. People are just gearing up. I don't know for what. Of course, now the right-wingers tell you we're gearing up for the communist invasion from within, you see. And I know that some of you are familiar with the John Birch Society, and some of you are familiar with the Blue Book, and that's not a Bible either. But, and some of the material that has been distributed by the right-wing parties in this country addresses itself to that, in fact, that there's been a Chinese landing, thousands of Chinese have landed in Mexico, and will now be pushing north into the United States of America, and that in fact the State Department has been responsible for bringing Africans in. Now this is to show you how ridiculous this is. Have been responsible for bringing Africans in and disguising them as migrant workers when in fact they're really Congolese paratroopers, you see. And what they've done is they've brought them in, and with the communists pushing in from the south of Mexico, and with the Congolese paratroopers pushing across from east to west, you understand, that the country is being threatened. You see, the government in Washington will no longer be standing. And I don't want you to think I'm getting off track because this is in line with law enforcement. You see, and with these types of things, and people are really gearing up in the country. You see, we're buying arms. Sales went up 200% in some areas. You see, people are just buying up all the arms they possibly can. Now, the thing that is beyond me, you see. Now I know how fine of a fighting man, you understand, a black man is, or I am, in Vietnam, you understand. See, the man, even Westmoreland finally came out, you understand. So this man is an excellent fighter, you understand. All the crack units of our armed forces, 101st, the 196th Light Brigade, the 82nd, these types of units are made up anywhere from 50, 60, 70% black, you see. And so, in other words, knowing that we have expertise, you understand, in warfare, you see. And yet I look up, and last year, man, we had those, those figures came out on, the number of people that were killed last year in the riots and disturbances, and I think it was something like, 83, 80 blacks and 3 whites. And man, I'm a hell of a bad shot. Really, I am, Now look at what happened in Orangeburg. I think that was, in April of this year, Orangeburg, South Carolina, you see. And this was when the police department down there, the State Highway Patrol, and others said that they were fired upon by those black students down there on the University of South Carolina State College, and it was necessary for them to return fire. I think they killed, 3 and wounded 37. That's a grand total of 40. And the point that I always wanted to raise was that I'm quite sure that of all those 40 individuals who were killed and wounded, that all of them were armed to the teeth. I mean, that would I be correct in assuming that? You see? No, because I think that ties in with the AR-15 rifle thing, controversy that you're having. You know, the police department says, well, what this is actually for is this is for sniping. I don't know how closely some of you follow this AR-15 controversy, particularly in St. Paul. But you see, the man was talking about that this rifle was for sniping and for criminals who were barricaded, you understand, behind walls of brick and granite and that type of thing. And it was interesting that I had an opportunity to be at a Civil Rights Commission hearing, St. Paul Civil Rights Commission hearing in St. Paul last, I think it was Wednesday or Thursday. And they had some experts from the University of Minnesota and other concerned residents who had certain knowledge of the workings of this AR-15. It was amazing they were talking about the AR-15 as it is fired and as it propels itself through the air will disintegrate to a certain degree. So a person raised the question, you see, to a police officer, what was his name? All right, it slips my memory right now. But they raised the question to this officer that if this bullet was disintegrated, you see, in flight, you understand, it would disintegrate on impact, you understand, how, you know, you have a criminal barricaded behind a brick wall, you see, what do you expect this bullet to do, you see? So I said, we're not concerned with that. So the man went on to say, well, you know, is it not true that the AR-15 bullet, and I believe it's a 22.3 caliber, you understand, that hitting you anywhere, you understand, in your body, you know, the shock itself would be enough to kill an individual. He said, that's right. That's the purpose of it, you see. Now, yet the same officer, one of his colleagues, came on later on, and he went on to say that the purpose of the police department was to wound, you see, not to kill, you see. Our business is to wound and to apprehend, you see. I thought that was beautiful. But this shows you the inconsistency and the credibility gap in the police department, even, you see. People couldn't even get together on that statement. But I think one of the most dastardly statements I heard, you know, and it was the last statement of the evening, and they had, he's a real policeman, man, he's a real policeman. I think that only thing, he probably came along about 23 years, 24 years too early, you know, or too late rather. Because the only thing he lacked, you understand, was the black suit, you understand, with the armband, with the swastika, jack boots. It's the only thing he lacked. So a young, and this was a white fellow who raised this question, by the way. He said, well, tell me. He said, given a situation, and there's a riot situation, and he was asking this in regards to the deaths in, say, Detroit, Michigan. And if we know that everyone that was killed there, with the exception of the police, was classified as a rioter, or an arsonist, or a looter. You know, we all know that. So he raised this question and said the situation that was, say, to happen here in St. Paul, and an individual who happened to be an innocent bystander, you understand, was mistakenly shot down, how would he be classified in the police report? Would he be classified as an innocent bystander, or would he be classified as a looter and arsonist? Sergeant said, well, we just have to classify him as a looter, you know. And I think with that type of mentality on the part of police departments, you see, because what does this do for the family of an individual? You see, I mean, we know how our neighbors gossip, you know, and, you know, Tom Jones is shot down, and the paper carried the story the next day that he was shot down because he was looting, when in fact he was on his way to work. You know, I mean, they had a situation like that in Detroit. It's amazing. Let me speak to that. That fella, he was deaf and dumb, and he was on his way to work, 6 o'clock in the morning, lunch pail in hand, you see, and a National Guardsman was behind him. Now, what the original story was from the National Guardsman is that what he called this man to halt, you see. And the man had his back to him, he admitted, but he called to him to halt, you see. And the man broke and ran, and he found it necessary to shoot him, killed him. What happened, someone did do some investigation, and this is all in the Colonel report. This is documented, you see. So I'm not telling you any communist tales. So they did an investigation and found out, you know, to their dismay, that in fact this fellow was a deaf mute, you see. Couldn't hear, you know, couldn't talk. And the statement read that when the National Guardsman called out for him to halt, that the man did have his back turned to him, and he broke and ran, you see. And then we have the situation in Newark, you see. When this was a statement given right from the director of the Newark Police Department, you see. He was talking about that he had received a call that the tension was rising in one of the particular housing projects in Newark. And he rushed to the scene as commander-in-chief of the police department. I guess that's part of his job. And when he arrived, he said, you know, there were at least 125 policemen in the streets, you know, crouched behind cars, guns at ready. And he walked up to one of his sergeants and said, "What's the problem?" And he says, "There have been shots fired." Man's eyes, man looked wild-eyed. Sweat running down his face. You understand? It makes me I'm trying to figure out who has the training. You understand? That man who's sitting up in the window laughing at him, that policeman out there with the gun in his hands. I'm trying to figure out which way this thing runs. But anyways, the director went on to ask him what the problem was, and had the sniper been sighted. And he said, no, but we're closing in on him, you see. Yeah, right, we're closing in on him. Now, what happened is just at that time, 2 shots were fired, you see. And around the corner came a National Guardsman, you understand, in full flight. And the director grabbed him and said, what's the problem? What's the problem? You've been fired on. And he said, no, I fired on a sniper, you see. And the director said, where was he? He said, he was up in that window, you see. And he said, did he fire on you first? He said, well, no, he stuck his head out the window, and I'd been told that no one was to be allowed to look out those windows, so I fired on him, you see. Now, what had happened, that automatic reaction, you see, alerted every policeman in the street. Now, what had happened, and this was, you have to remember that this conversation was just a second type of conversation, 5 or 10 or 15 seconds. In the meanwhile, the police, the National Guardsmen, the state police had rushed up and opened fire on this building, you see. Not because any shot had come from the building, but because this National Guardman, being that he was inexperienced, you see, was merely carrying out the orders of his superior. His superior told him, said, don't let nobody look out the window. And this boy apparently didn't have enough sense to say, get back. He just pulled the trigger, you see. And we see what kind of reaction this got, Now, these types of things happen. Of course, now we know that our police departments have been appropriated some $40 million in funds for police training, anti-riot training, and the like. And I think that's beautiful, because I will remember last year, and I think some of you will also remember, that when they were talking about appropriating $40 million for a rat control bill in Congress, you understand, the gross down in Iowa said, oh man, let them go get some cats, $40 million, for what, But yet when the man talks about appropriating $40 million for better law enforcement, we have no problem getting it through at all. Of course, then, too, if you know anything about Congress, they had a situation there where they had decided to build a beauty salon for some of the women representatives. I think we have about 6 now, And I think it ran something like $255,000, $300,000, And I think the bill went through something like 1 minute and 5 seconds, you see. There's no problem there. When we talk about fixing up somebody's hair, you understand, we're talking about buying more sophisticated type of weapons to kill people, we have no problems. But see, when we talk about addressing ourselves to the problems of stopping rats from biting and eating up babies, you see, then the man tells us to go get some more cats, you see. And I think that's another interesting thing. And I'll never forget it, and this is another thing, and I do this in closing. I see that my colleague, Mr. Kent, has not arrived. And I think there's a situation with Martin Luther King. And I think it's amazing. And here again, I think this is probably the note to close off on, talking about effective police departments and law enforcement agencies in this country. And there's now, 5 weeks after the assassination of King, and apparently the law enforcement agencies of this country are no closer to the assassin or the assassins than they were that Sunday when Ramsey Clark got on TV and said we're just hours away from them. Now, I maintain with that type of statement tells me that there is a credibility gap amongst law enforcement agencies in this country and the mass roots of people, mass grassroots of people. I mean, that means both black and white. You see, Ramsey Clark said we're just hours away from the assassins. And, of course, it was interesting that the first statements that ever came out of there were that we have the man in flight, we're just hours away from capturing him, and it was one individual, you see. This was not a conspiracy. Of course, now that has kind of changed, Of course, we went so far now that someone like Lester Maddox, and here's a man that wouldn't even fly the flags of his state and the American flag at half-mast in Georgia during the day of King's funeral, who has now went on to say that King, in fact, was assassinated by communists, you see. King had fell into disfavor with the Communist Party, and they had assassinated him, see. Of course, now with that type of thing, that's the same type of thinking that came out of the Kennedy assassination, as you remember. Of course, Maddox went on so far as to say that, in fact, he knew for a fact that this man had fled to Cuba. You understand? Of course, Fidel did a nice job on that. He said, if he's here, black people in America can have him. You see. So we got off that kick. But now I think with some interesting things, and I don't know how closely some of you have followed it, and I think this is in line with what you talk about credibility gap amongst the ghetto and the police departments of our country. You remember the situation with the Sergeant Bradshaw in Memphis? How many of you are familiar with that? Raise your hands if you are. How many of you are familiar with Sergeant Bradshaw? Let's see, the Minneapolis Tribune stopped printing, didn't it? No. No, well, Sergeant Bradshaw, as you remember, I don't know, and I listened to it very closely. The first hour was after that the king assassinated. In fact, the first hour afterwards, the bulletins, came over the radio that the king had been assassinated. Naturally, everybody went into their tear bit, and they went on to say the king had been assassinated, and that in fact the Memphis Police Department were now in pursuit. You understand, the assassin who was driving a white Mustang, and this report was coming via police radio. You see, right into the Central Police radio at the Central Police headquarters. And that the police officers were in pursuit of this car, white Mustang, and then in fact the bulletin came in about 5 minutes later that a blue Pontiac had closed on the white Mustang and had opened fire, you understand. And this thing became very dramatic, something like out of a Cecil B. DeMille picture, We're becoming very dramatic now. We're in pursuit of the villain. And then you didn't hear more about it, you see. So I remember about 4 days later it happened to come out that what had happened, you know how newspaper people are. They will do a lot of snooping, you see. And what happened is that someone managed to do a little snooping, and they found out that the individual who was relaying this report of this chase, which later turned out to be a myth, was a Sergeant R.B. Bradshaw, you see. So when first questioned on it, Bradshaw denied even being in the area. He said he wasn't even there, you know what you're talking about. But finally someone trapped him on that, so then he admitted. Now this was the story that he gave, you see. He was riding along in this patrol car, you understand. And I must impress upon you that this is in a serious vein, you see, but I have to laugh because it's so tragic. Sergeant Bradshaw said he was riding along in his patrol car, and a young man pulled up next to him with a radio band in his car and said that he was receiving a report over his radio from another ham operator who was observing this chase, you see. Now, Sergeant Bradshaw relayed to his police dispatcher, you understand, this chase as it was relayed to him by the young man it was being relayed to him from someone else, you understand, it could not be seen, you see. Now, what this did, though, see, we have to understand this, and we have to remember that 3 days later that the white Mustang that was supposedly registered to that mythical individual named Eric Sturgill Gott, I know what his name was, this automobile was in Atlanta, you see, which Atlanta is southeast of Memphis, you see. Now what probably happened there is that everyone was concentrating north of Memphis, you see, in pursuit of the assassin, you understand. My man got in his car and drove on out south, went on to Atlanta, all about his business. You see, I'm just saying what this did. Now, what happened? Apparently, this has not even been pursued. You see, on here is Bradshaw, a veteran, I guess, of some 15 years on the Memphis Police Department, and would allow himself to be drawn into to a thing such as that. You see. Then, first of all, of course, the man denied that. First of all, he denied that he was even there, and then finally, when pressured, he admitted that he was there. And this is the type of effective police work that he did. Now, I say this took place in Memphis, Tennessee. I know this has nothing to do. This is irrelevant to what goes on here in Minneapolis, you see, because we do have such an efficient and effective police department. But I just wanted to let you know what some of the feeling is. Now, a lot of people have said that, well, King is gone, the concept of nonviolence is gone, and this might be true and it might not be true. But I maintain that if we're going to continue to talk about this, if you're going to continue to talk to black people in this country about any degree of law, order, and justice, you see, I think that you should move with all due speed, or the establishment should move with all due speed to make an attempt to apprehend, you see, the assassin and those people that conspired against and participated in the death of Martin Luther King, you see. This has not been done. And it's going to be pretty hard for me to accept this thing that we're going to have a degree of law and order and justice in this country until it can be proven to me that, in fact, both the federal and local agencies of this country are doing everything within their power to bring the assassins or assassin to justice. This is not being done, apparently. It's interesting that, with the exception of the weeks that first week and a half that followed the King assassination, the papers have really played this thing now, you see. No longer even talk about the Martin Luther King assassination, you see. Now, the only thing that disturbs me with this type of attitude on the police departments, with this type of lack of concern on the part of police departments in this country, and particularly the federal agencies, FBI, CIA, I think it's going to be rather hard for those types of bigots and racists who now see themselves as being the executor, the judge and executor, who now will feel they will take it upon themselves in each city throughout this country to rid that particular city of those particular black militants, you see, or particular black leaders, you see. Because the man says, well, they assassinated King, the police department have not pursued with any degree of effectiveness the apprehension of the assassin. So maybe I can take it upon myself, you understand, to shoot a Harry Davis or a Seal Davis. Maybe I can take it upon myself to blow away Ralph Abernathy, you see. Right. Now you talk about lawlessness, you see. That is the first step towards lawlessness, you see. Because then what happens, reprisals beget reprisals, you see. Because, you know, as far as I'm concerned, and I don't see how, you know, that a George Wallace, you understand, can survive through the summer. Really, I don't. Particularly if the police departments of this country do not do a better job in regards to finding assassin of Martin Luther King, you see. I don't see. Because apparently in this country, this is what we're playing, tit for tat. I hate to say it like that. It sounds like a child's game. It shows that one has a child's mentality. But that's what we're playing, tit for tat. And I would like to at this time close out. I see that Frank has not arrived. I know that there are some questions, if there are any. If it's all right with the moderator, I would try to respond to them to the best of my ability.
Questions are in order. There's a question back there.
Yes.
What's the word on Dick Cunningham's reporting? The most recent incident with the Golden Valley Shops and stuff. It's been my impression previously that Cunningham was, you know, of the white staff members on the paper, one of the better ones. But did he get his story from the Minneapolis cops or what?
Well, I really couldn't speak for Dick.
No.
But I would presume that he did. I think that he has made an attempt to contact the women who were involved. But as far as an official version, and you have to remember that, see, the police department didn't take any statement from those women, so the only official version that you have is the one that was taken by the Minneapolis Police Department from the 4 Golden Valley policemen, you see. So he's just merely going by the official version that he was given.
Is the way of putting out any kind of a communication paper now?
Not to my knowledge, no.
We have about a minute left till we're supposed to assemble at the other building, the other room. Is that right? What's a quarter after 11? Quarter after 11. Oh, then we've got plenty of time. Anybody else?
Yes.
Any questions?
Has the Minneapolis Police Commission done anything for bringing the police department and people together by programs to
Minneapolis Police Commission?
Yeah.
Minneapolis doesn't have a police commission. Oh, you mean the police department? Oh, yes, I guess every police department in every major city in America has some type of community relations program, I guess. I mean, I'm not saying the Minneapolis Police Department is breaking his neck, you know, that's what you want to know. Of course, you know, I know we're tied up in this thing, particularly in this town right now, in this thing of sensitivity training, you see. Of course, the Minneapolis Police Department would be pretty hard-pressed to get anyone from within its ranks to conduct any classes in sensitivity training. I think we all understand that, you know. You see. Because only I could give you the necessary sensitivity training about me, you see. In order for the Minneapolis Police Department to come out with those types of, and this is part of their community relations classes, you see, they'd have to get some black patrolmen down, and I think they only have 4 or 5. That's out of 804 men. I guess that's not bad. Yes.
Well, in this line, what's the Minneapolis Police Federation?
Minneapolis Police Federation. You know, I've always maintained that in every city, in every society, or particularly in every city, you always have to have that particular instrument, you understand, that mouths the racist types of slogans, you understand. And apparently the Minneapolis Federation is that particular institution in Minneapolis.
I was just going to ask you, who is giving sensitivity training right now in the Minneapolis Police Department? Is it just officers?
No, they've called, we understand it, that they have, well, of course, you have to realize that in regards to the Minneapolis Police Department, that the sensitivity training and dealing with minorities has been going on for the last 4 years in the Minneapolis Police Department. That doesn't say that all the students are receptive to the types of classes that are conducted. I think that's very apparent. I think they've tried a new approach now, until the extent that they're going into the black community and they're getting those type of responsible black leaders to come down and conduct classes. Yes, I see that.
Yeah, how is that ultimately on these charges of racism in the jury selection? Is that thrown out now?
Well, I would be quite sure, knowing how the system is made up, I'm quite sure that he's probably been called to task for that, you see. Yeah. I'm quite sure the Bar Association will have him in for a private meeting, you understand, and the boys will iron out their differences. Yeah.
Has there been a number of Negroes trying to get in with the fire department?
has been turned down, or hasn't there been any?
Well, yeah, we seem to have a problem, I guess, with the test,
How about that?
particularly the oral portion of the test. Yeah.
Why was there's such a problem with allowing you and others on this commission to ride along in squad cars with officers and just, observe your
Well, I don't think there was a problem with other members of the commission. I think it should be noted here that when I threw that out, you understand that none of the other commission members, none of my other comrades or colleagues, you understand, responded to say that they also would like to ride along. Everyone remained pretty silent on this thing. Well, I think that if someone else on the commission had thrown it out, it would have been, an accepted thing, and we would have had no problem. But it just happened to be, it came from me, you understand. It seems to be that my personality rubs Minneapolis Police Department the wrong way, But, of course, Calvin has said that if I had wanted to, I could have come along. And of course, I just threw that out. That was just a diversionary thing. I really didn't want to ride with him, man, Yeah, You ride with him and, the fellas start talking about you in the neighborhood, talk about you snitching and carrying on. So of course, the other thing was, knowing Minneapolis Police Department, I would have hated to be riding along one night and, the hospital reports the next day in the paper you'd have read that what had happened, that the police car that I was riding in, it came up on some burglary suspects, and I was caught in crossfire. Yes. Well, madam, first of all, I'm not a part of that organization, that paramilitary organization. The status was one of maintaining some degree of cool and calm in the community. Of course, what had happened, I think, first of all, the Minneapolis Police Federation became dissatisfied with it. I guess that the group had stopped some white folks out in the community who really didn't have any business being out there at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and these were married men, wives and children at home. Apparently, the Police Federation was a little dissatisfied with the actions carried on by the protection unit, and then with the Golden Valley incident coming up, you understand, it's apparent that blacks had taken law and order and justice into their hands, and this is the thing we cannot tolerate. We all know that. And so it was necessary to put some restrictions on the patrol to the extent that it's been cut down in numbers, that new guidelines, new criteria has been given to the patrol to the extent of the things they should be able to do, they can't do, this type of thing. So in other words, they've been rendered totally ineffective.
One of the yes.
Are you at all hopeful about the betterment of the police department in Minneapolis? Do you think that some progress is going to be made, real progress?
Yes. I mean, they make progress from year to year, I guess. But you're talking in regards to better race relations between the...
Yeah, and the better professional police.
Better professional police. Yeah, well, one thing I am sympathetic with the police department is that when you talk about a more professional type of department, you have to talk about, first of all, giving higher salaries, I don't know if the taxpayers of this city are ready to have the capacity to deem this to be necessary, But as far as the police department goes, I would hope that the relationship would be better. I hope that they would become more professional and more effective. Of course, then I'm not the mayor of Minneapolis nor the chief of police. You understand? I probably could talk a little better on the subject if I had, more black people who were on the department who we could sit down and we could, discuss it. But as I said before, there's so few. You see. Of course, it's an interesting thing that I don't know how many of you are familiar, and I know it goes quite some way back, but there were as many black men on the Minneapolis Police Department in 1924 as there are today. It's amazing. In fact, you even had a black man in the Minneapolis Fire Department back in the 30s. So I don't know where we're going. I don't know which way we're going. You see. Yeah. Right. Well, one thing I would like to throw out to you, why it's still really on my mind. And I think this goes along with this thing of law, order, and justice, you see. Now, we know that the three of them are equals. We would all agree to that, right? That the three are equal, you see. Well, which is and I would like some of you to respond to this. Of the three, which is the last among equals? Of law, order, and justice.
There's a...
Yes.
I think as it stands now, you'd have to say justice is the last, because when people loot as an act of survival, that they either need the food to survive, that they might need the money to make rent payments, this sort of thing, that an act of survival does not condone. And yet, in a very humanistic sense, it's justice that people are provided with these sorts of essentials, and with this not justice in any state.
So justice is the last among equals, as it now stands. I agree with you, it is. Yes.
I kind of think that justice is different for everyone. Although law and order may be very close to the same, I mean, from your point of view as from my point of view, something that may be justice for you may not be justice for me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, allowing someone to get away with some unfair business practices or something, you know, like that. It's not justice for someone.
That violation of
that's
antitrust
getting-
laws and that
getting
type of
hurt.
thing, right.
I mean,
right.
but it may not be a direct violation. It's maybe a little shady or something, but it's helping him, so he's going to feel it's justice for him,
Mhm.
whereas the person that's getting hurt doesn't feel it's justice.
Mhm.
So I think that the definition is all in the air too.
Right.
Also,
But
we have a problem.
then your conclusion would be that justice is the last among equals.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
I'm not sure I dig the idea of justice being part of those other two as being equal, because you've got order maintained in a dictatorship.
Right. Totalitarian, right. Fascist type of government. I agree with you. Right.
So wouldn't you have to almost put justice then in a different category, as being something after or law and order?
After law and order.
Right, but in a different category.
Right? I guess you would. Right.
Some phrase like this, that justice under law, fairly popular phrase.
Yeah. Justice under law, right. So then I think we would all agree that justice is last among equals, last among equals, as I said again. Is that right?
I suppose we were saying, aren't we, that we can't really have justice without law.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're really having is a kind of white man's imposition of the white man's perception of justice without law.
But if justice was rendered equally, you see, we probably wouldn't have really any need for law and order then, would we? Right.
Could I ask another question while I'm looking for, did you have a question? I'm looking for other hands. This is not as profound as this question about the relationship with justice and order, but I'm interested in the attitude of the image that the black man has of the police. You know, we wonder why black men do not get into the police force. Now you can say that tests of discrimination.
Oh, well, first of all.
But does a black man really think of being a police officer as being very honorable and desirable?
Well, I don't think it's his childhood ambition, no. Well, first of all, I think that in the black community that you will find that really the police department is looked upon as an occupation for us.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. And I think that's right in line with what you said about the fascist type of government, you understand? Law, order, and justice, you see. Only thing we know, we've always had the law and order side of the club. Yeah, right. don't
And we think that, you know, if we just raise the salary and make it really attractive, the colored man would love to be a police officer.
No, it's not
But
true.
the historic experience of the black man with the police seems to me to militate against the whole idea. So we have a lot to do. We have barriers, seems to me.
Well, you know, I think maybe what the police department have to do is like the National Guard did last year after the riots, and they received such bad publicity. You see, they went out and got them a PR man. You see. Yes. Yeah, well, then you say the property. Well, see, first of all, the property is not ours. It never has been ours. Yes, the slumlords, right. Absentee landlord. That's right. And that's usually the man who takes all the money out of the community, never puts anything back in, never refurbishes, you know, that type of thing.
I suppose you're assuming that it's a complex task of the police officer to protect both people and property. And how does he differentiate between which he is most concerned about, protection of property or protection of people?
And it comes between the question.
But let me respond. Let me ask this question. Talking about how the situation can be handled, you see. And I think we can look at some of the countries of the world, like England. There's never been any need there for patrolmen or policemen to carry guns and revolvers, and they seem to be able to handle their situation pretty well. I mean, when people are in disorder, we admit that there's a certain degree of force that has to be used against them. But what I'm trying to get clear in my mind, you see, when we talk about protection of property, now when the students are to go down to Fort Lauderdale, every April, you see, for the past 10 or 12 or 13 or 14 years, and just tear that town up, you see. I'm trying to recall in my mind how many incidences that we've had where the police have opened fire on those students for destroying property. Of course, then that's a totally white group, 9 times out of 10 knows. Maybe that makes a difference. Maybe that just ties in right with the white racist society. I mean, if I'm wrong, correct me. Oh, you're not familiar with slumlord? Oh, yeah, you're really uninformed. No, the slumlord is usually the individual who's, gives, $5,000 a year to his church. He's probably Presbyterian, Unitarian, Catholic, this type of thing. And he's usually always the one that stands up and says, we just can't have them out here, When they move in, your property depreciates. They don't maintain the proper type of homes. They let their houses run down. That's usually the slumlords, you see. Usually the slumlord is a civic leader. Belongs to the Junior Chamber of Commerce, We're respected in the community, you see. And the reason that we never really can identify him because he doesn't come, he usually sends a lackey to collect the rent, you see. Or he usually has, people in the ghetto mail the rent in. This is what we say when we say about the slumlords, you see. He's usually the individual that, has and owns 5 or 6 pieces of property, 5 or 6 buildings in the community, you see. And you can't decide which is the more appalling, That's usually who the slumlord is. Yeah.
Well, when they talk about new low-rent housing, everybody in my family's in construction, and the first thing they get the picture of is throwing up a shack because there's not enough money put into it in the first place to make it something decent.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering where you think money should come from, what source of money we can find so that good low-rent housing can be constructed.
Yeah, well, I think we have just a reservoir of money that we spend every day in Vietnam, for a senseless escapade, you see. Because, I'm not, there's one thing, let me clarify the statement. You see, I'm not tied up in this thing that this threat of communism, you see. Because, I don't see communism every day, you see. I don't see any KGB walking up and down the streets, you understand, with submachine guns at the ready. You understand? But I do see racism being maintained in this country. So I cannot be concerned with communism, but I can be concerned with racism. Consequently, I'm concerned with taking care and alleviating problems in this country, you see. So consequently, I would be against such a fiasco as we are now conducting in Vietnam, you see. And the resources for making the types of improvements that we talk about for the social ills of people are available. Yeah.
Well, I disagree with your stand that the war in Vietnam is responsible for the lack of spending for civil improvements in our country. Because
no, well, let me say this. It's merely well, it is. First of all, I say I'm against the war. First of all, I make that point clear. The other point that I realize that the war is merely an excuse that is used by the congressional leaders of our country as an excuse for not appropriating more funds to alleviate the problems of social ills in this country.
I think it's an interesting question, but I'm wondering if we
might be off
try
the
to stay back.
Well, it makes no difference. I mean,
It's not unrelated, but
we're all flexible here.
Yeah, maybe you have a question.
Yeah.
In an actual riot, what do you feel the role of policemen is during
The question you raised is, in an actual riot, what should be the role of the police officer?
What should be the role, or what should be? Yeah, well, I really don't know what his role should be. I guess that his role should be that of protecting life and then property, but I think it's usually reverse. You see.
How do you think this should be done? After the riot has actually started?
Actually, right, yeah. Well, first of all, we have to, looking into the role of the policeman, you see, the role that he's going to play, in dealing with this riot. See, first of all, we have to understand why the riot probably started and how his role is going to be affected. See, usually, and the Colonel report has stated this, that 9 out of 10 of the riots that were started because of some action taken by the police department, an incident of an arrest, or this type of thing, you see. Now, know, how a riot should be controlled. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we need to go to such countries as Japan and France. Now, they tell me that France has one of the finest or did have one of the finest riot control units in the world at one time, you see. But I mean, really, we don't know. I mean, it's left up to the individual, you see, how they can control it. I guess we try to control a riot to lose as little life as we possibly can, to have as little property damage as we possibly can, you see. I would presume this position would be taken by the police department on how to control a riot. I really don't know. If I did know, I could probably be lending that knowledge in Washington somewhere. How would you suggest it? See, none of us know, you see. Towards then, I guess what it...
It's late to deal with the problem.
After the riot started. Yeah, right. That's like locking the door after the horse is gone, that type of thing. But, yeah, that's a good question. It stumps me. It stumps me because, see, what I've always saw and how riots are dealt with in this country, you understand, is usually through the pistol and the club. And we've gotten tied up in this philosophy. And we don't seem to be prepared to absorb anything different from that. You know?
I suppose the best we can do is that we really have training.
Well, of course, what it is, someday we might come up with a type of gas, you understand, we just put one to sleep and will not have any after harmful effects, you know. Maybe we might come up with that, I don't know. We came up with mace. I don't know why we couldn't come up with that. Yes?
Good question.
Mr. Edwards, it seems to me that in large measure, what we're driving at here is really kind of original questions about the relationship of law, order, and justice. You're quite right. These are, in a sense, terms on the same plane. One cannot really have justice without law and order. And on the other hand, it seems to me that law in the right sense grows out of a sense of justice for all people, so they are a relative term. It seems to me that a large part of the white community is very much concerned, naturally, with the maintenance of law and order. And I think that what needs to be done is to see to it that while law and order are maintained, that progress is made at the same time toward realizing justice. And I think it's that failure to see real progress toward justice during periods of law and order that leads eventually to a breakdown of law and order. So the response
Continue to maintain law and order and to gradually work towards justice. I'm wondering, we have much time left in this country.
Of course, that's part of the issue. The progress, and I think there has been some, has been gradual.
I see. Yeah, I guess you're right. Of course, I'm quite sure that man standing down in the corner on the Ghetto, who was prepared to go to the street, you understands that too. You understand? This thing, gradualism. I think he understands that. Right?
I think that's the problem. It's a matter of sense of time.
Yes. And I maintain maybe we don't have too much time left.
I got accused from behind the room that we must adjourn so the people can get ready for the next session. We thank Mr. Edwards very much.
Thank you.